Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 1224 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today I'm going to be speaking with longtime diabetes blogger Scott Strumello. Scott and I are going to talk a little bit about insulin pricing, but we're going to talk a lot about something called the Orange Book and how the FTC noticed that maybe some products were on there that shouldn't have been. Now, I know that might sound kind of boring and inside baseball, but trust me, this has implications on you and your family, and it's a very interesting look into how things actually work. Please don't forget that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. When you place your first order for AG1 with my link, you'll get 5 free travel packs and a free year supply of vitamin D. Drink ag1.com/juicebox. Use my offer code JUICEBOX at checkout at CozyEarth.com, and you can be wearing the same sweatpants I'm wearing right now, except they'll cost you 30% less. CozyEarth.com. Use the offer code JUICEBOX at checkout to save 30% off of your entire order. US Med is sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast, and we've been getting our diabetes supplies from US Med for years. You can as well. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. Use the link or the number, get your free benefits check, and get started today with US Med. Today's episode is sponsored by Medtronic Diabetes, a company that's bringing people together to redefine what it means to live with diabetes. Later in this episode, I'll be speaking with Jalen. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 14. He's 29 now. He's going to tell you a little bit about his story. And then later at the end of this episode, you can hear my entire conversation with Jalen. To hear more stories with Medtronic Champions, go to medtronicdiabetes.com/juicebox or search the hashtag Medtronic Champion on your favorite social media platform. This show is sponsored today by the glucagon that my daughter carries, Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox.
Hi, my name is Scott Strumello. Some in the diabetes community know me because I have been a longtime blogger. I think I started back in 2005 or so. My blog is still out there. It's blog.sstrumello.com. And I was also very active in social channels, Twitter for a long time. Not so much that anymore. I'm more active these days on Threads and LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. LinkedIn is a little bit more of a professional social media platform. That's the reason I opted to publish my article, which I think we'll probably talk a little bit about.
Yeah, I'm excited about that, Scott. Tell me, is this what you do for a living, or is this something you do on the side?
This is something I do on the side, but by nature, I'm a very curious person. And, I was curious why, originally it was about biosimilar insulins back in, 2006 or so, 2005, 2006. I raised the question, all the patents on these products have expired. Why don't we have generics? And I wrote kind of a multi-page article on that subject, and there were a whole bunch of reasons why it wasn't happening like it should have. Mm-hmm. Most of those issues have since been resolved. Most recently in 2019, when the FDA made a policy decision to recognize any insulin that had been previously approved as a drug under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, which all insulins up until that time had been regulated under. They would recognize them as a biologic, and therefore they would be eligible for biosimilars for the very first time ever. And with that, companies started pursuing them. And along the way, I happened to notice, because my interest was in the insulin, all these companies also have biosimilars of the GLP-1 inhibitor liraglutide, which was formerly known as Novo Nordisk Victoza. Then a couple of years after it was introduced, they got an FDA label extension for the indication of obesity without type 2 diabetes, and they branded that version Saxenda. It's the exact same drug. It's just got a different name, and they're selling it to different people.
Okay. So you wrote this article. So listen, I'll tell people, like, you and I, we talked before. We're not sure if we've even ever met, maybe once at a blogging conference, 15 years ago or something like that, but we don't know each other. But yeah. I follow you on LinkedIn, and I think of you as this curious, intelligent person who asks a lot of questions that I find myself asking. Like, why is this like this? How come that's not cheaper? Why is this not available? And I love the way you ask them and then follow up with, these are probably the reasons why. And it is a part of life with diabetes that, as the regular layperson does not have time to figure out what's going on here, right? So these things happen behind the scenes and you don't know why you're being impacted in your real life.
Yeah.
Go back to the insulin for a second before we move to the GLP. Now that, I'll be a little, I don't know how this will come off, but in the last year or so, the pharma companies have been saying about insulin, oh, don't worry, the price is going down. I'm like, the price is going down because you're about to lose hold of it. It's not, you know what I mean? They held a death grip on it till the very last second, and then they tried to act magnanimous about it at the end. If you take insulin or sulfonylureas, you are at risk for your blood sugar going too low. You need a safety net when it matters most. Be ready with Gvoke HypoPen. My daughter carries Gvoke HypoPen everywhere she goes because it's a ready-to-use rescue pen for treating very low blood sugar in people with diabetes ages 2 and above that I trust. Low blood sugar emergencies can happen unexpectedly, and they demand quick action. Luckily, Gvoke HypoPen can be administered in 2 simple steps, even by yourself in certain situations. Show those around you where you store Gvoke HypoPen and how to use it. They need to know how to use Gvoke HypoPen before an emergency situation happens. Learn more about why Gvoke HypoPen is in Arden's Diabetes Toolkit at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Gvoke shouldn't be used if you have a tumor in the gland on the top of your kidneys called a pheochromocytoma, or if you have a tumor in your pancreas called an insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk for safety information.
Yeah. And there is some truth to that. Like anything in pharma, it's always a little bit more, it's a little bit more complicated. There's the way I described my discovery process on how the pharmaceutical industry works. It's kind of like peeling a head of lettuce apart. You peel one leaf and then there's another one and another one and another one. And you think, I'm never going to get to the freaking answer.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually you get to the core and you're like, okay, that makes sense now. But there were just layers and layers and layers of, weirdness, things that you're like, do businesses really operate this way? And I'm like, yeah, if you're a pharmaceutical company, they do. My journey began years ago, back when I began blogging around, I don't know, I guess 2005, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to go back and look at when the first post was.
Yeah.
But the good thing is I was able to find or discover some people that were, I considered, very informative on the topic, and I followed them very closely. Lo and behold, they were consistently correct about different things. And, I was like, okay, so that's why this happens the way it does. It was kind of a fascinating journey of discovery, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But once I knew all that, then I could kind of piece together, okay, so this is why insulin is priced the way it is. And most of it is not because Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and Sanofi are choosing to price them through the roof, but it's the way that they choose to sell their insulins. The commercialization path, they decided to go for this big PBM rebate contracting sales model, whereby they start with sky-high list prices, and then they give rebates of 90% back. And so it looks like it's generous, but really the only reason it's generous is because they raised the price so high in the first place that they could discount it all back on the back end. So that's kind of the story with insulin.
Can I ask you a question? What's the
Yep.
business benefit of that? Like, why is it presented that way? What does it do for them?
There are a couple reasons, all of them few of which I would say are actually legal. I don't even know if they are legal, but the PBMs basically made a sales pitch to the pharmaceutical industry that said, look, we represent hundreds of millions of customers. You wouldn't have access to them without us. But guess what? We'll throw you a bone here. We'll keep off your biggest competitors off formulary. They won't be covered if you pay us a kickback, a legally exempted rebate kickback.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was basically how they operated. In order for pharma to avoid truly competing on the product's merits, they pay a little bit of extra money to the PBMs to keep their rivals off formulary. And lo and behold, you don't really have to compete on the product's merits.
Yeah.
It's based on the kickbacks that you're paying.
Well, that makes sense. Okay. And so
I'm not sure it does.
No,
but,
I mean, it makes sense that that's what they did.
Yeah.
I mean, based on what I saw, because, in people's regular life, they'll say all the time, like, well, my doctor wrote a script for X and I gave it to my insurance company. They said, we don't cover that, but you can have this.
Yeah.
And then you go, oh, okay. And that's the end of it. But on the back end, whatever you ended up with is paying a VIG so that you don't have access to the other thing.
Yeah. And also there's a little bit more about it. Not only are you being told this is our preferred product, but they're saying we're not even covering the non-preferred product. If you go back to the early 1990s when pharmacy benefits started to become a thing, because it wasn't until the early 90s that health plans even had pharmacy benefits. Prior to that, it was all like cash out of pocket.
Yeah.
And so it sort of evolved around the same time. But, keeping your rivals off formulary became a very powerful pitch. And the rebate kickbacks certainly helped do that. But I think somewhere along the way, I think it probably started happening around 2016 or 17 or so. That's when Novo Nordisk reported to investors via its SEC filings that its U.S. insulin margins had fallen into the negative territory. In other words, they were no longer earning money. They were still earning money, but the growth was negative.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, and most of that was because of rebates they were paying to keep Lilly and Sanofi insulins off formulary. Then a couple years later, Lilly decided, we're going to be benevolent here, and we're going to sell a cheaper version of Humalog. We'll call it Insulin Lispro. We'll sell it under the generic name. And that was a good thing because prior to that, you either got the heavily rebated, kickback-driven priced product sold through the PBMs, or you paid $400 a vial. It was kind of crazy.
Can I ask you a question? In retrospect, was it the right thing for them to do financially, or did it end up biting them in the ass at the end?
Actually, what happened was when Lilly did this, I think they were a little surprised at the extent to which the unbranded Humalog product sold. Like a year after they introduced Lilly Insulin Lispro injection, it accounted for 1/3 of U.S. Humalog sales.
Wow.
Like overnight. It's practically, they did no marketing of this product, and nearly 1/3 of their sales was the cheaper version. And I think at that point, that was when Lilly said, wait a minute, we don't need the PBMs to sell insulin at least. We can just sell it ourselves and say, screw the PBMs. We're not paying the kickbacks anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so that emboldened them to say to the PBMs, F you. Mm-hmm. We're not playing your kickback game anymore, at least for the insulin therapeutic category. We'll just sell it on our own. Our customers are happier. It costs us billions of dollars less money, and we earn more money. So it worked out for them. Lilly did it, and then like 2 weeks later, Novo Nordisk did the exact same thing, and then Sanofi was sort of forced to do the same. I'm not sure about Biocon, They're kind of a smaller player right now. But basically, that's kind of the deal, was that Lilly, because they learned that the PBMs were adding no value, and also there's another little, not so little law that got passed by Congress, which was called the American Rescue Plan of 2021. The American Rescue Plan of 2021 contained a little teeny provision that I don't think anybody even paid any attention to at the time. But basically, what it said was, for Medicaid, not Medicare, for Medicaid, we will no longer allow Medicaid to reimburse more than 100% of the average manufacturer price. And if you charge more than the average manufacturer price, you'll have to pay us, Medicaid, to get your drug listed on our formulary. And so that really tied Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and Sanofi's hands, because these were old, patent expired insulins that were heavily rebated. And suddenly they were faced with the prospect that they would actually be forced to pay the federal government in order to get those products listed on the Medicaid formulary.
Yeah.
And so the only resolution for that was to slash prices. So that also emboldened them a little bit to kind of say, you know what, we don't need the PBMs for this, and we'll move on.
I used to hate ordering my daughter's diabetes supplies. I never had a good experience, and it was frustrating. But it hasn't been that way for a while, actually for about 3 years now, because that's how long we've been using US Med. usmed.com/juicebox, or call 888-721-1514. US Med is the #1 distributor for Freestyle Libre systems nationwide. They are the #1 specialty distributor for Omnipod DASH, the #1 fastest growing tandem distributor nationwide, the #1 rated distributor in Dexcom customer satisfaction surveys. They have served over 1 million people with diabetes since 1996, and they always provide 90 days worth of supplies and fast and free shipping. US Med carries everything from insulin pumps and diabetes testing supplies to the latest CGMs like the Libre 3 and Dexcom G7. They accept Medicare nationwide and over 800 private insurers. Find out why US Med has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau at usmed.com/juicebox, or just call them at 888-721-1514. Get started right now, and you'll be getting your supplies the same way we do. The whole thing is, I mean, it's so complex. I tried one time to really wrap my head around the model between the pharma company, the PBM, and the end user, and it felt like it was purposefully muddy.
And it was.
Yeah.
But that's very much the product of the PBMs not wanting anyone to know about their little kickback scheme, which, by the way, is not such a little kickback scheme. It's the last number I had, it was more than $250 billion a year in rebates across all drugs.
So they jack the price up so that they can skimp. It's not, they take a piece of it, and that piece ends up being $250 billion.
Yeah, it's not just the PBMs. The PBMs are big motivator behind it. But a lot of the PBMs, which are one and the same with the insurance companies, the United Healthcare, Optum Rx, Civica, Express Scripts, and Aetna, CVS, Caremark, they're all one together. In other words, they're vertically integrated with these insurance companies. And so they, it hits the bottom line of the insurance company, not the PBM per se.
Okay.
What they were doing is they were basically saying, we'll give you a discount on your premiums to employers. They were saying, we'll give you a discount on your premiums. We'll call them premium offsets. All that money was coming from PBM rebates that were paid to them. So in other words, to sell more insurance policies, they're taking money which is intended for patient relief and instead giving it to sell more policies. I mean, you couldn't make something up more complex or more convoluted than this. I mean, it's insane.
I got a headache thinking about it the last time I tried, honestly. It's why I appreciate somebody like you who can sit down and just thoughtfully remember it. How much reading do you think you do on these things?
I don't do so much anymore. I used to years ago. And this is, the accumulation of years of reading and knowledge on this topic.
Yeah.
After a while, it just sort of sticks with you.
Well, all right. So let's kind of jump ahead to the article you wrote that I saw recently. Tell me what prompted you to write it and give people an overview of what it's about.
I don't even remember what the title was. It was kind of a long one. Give me a second. I have it here. Okay. But basically, the article was basically how the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, had taken some action on April 30th, 2024. I was saying 19. I'm going back to my blog start year. And basically, the FTC acted, and they basically said, look, to the pharmaceutical companies. They first did it back in November of 2023 for epinephrine pen injectors and also for asthma inhalers. And basically what was happening was the drug industry was listing patents for medical devices in the Food and Drug Administration's Orange Book, which is a listing of drugs that is voluntarily populated by the drug industry. The FDA doesn't really take a very hands-on approach to managing that. But what's written in the law is that only the drug or the biologic medicine is permitted to be listed in the FDA Orange Book, not the device. So you may sell an EpiPen, for example, but the pen itself can't be listed. Only the epinephrine molecule can be listed. And so last November, they said, we're going to challenge a bunch of these inappropriate patent listings on the food FDA Orange Book. And they were able to do it successfully. And that got them to thinking, there's probably other drugs that we can do this for. And voila, here we are, GLP-1 inhibitors being the hot drug of the moment. And a bunch of inappropriate patent listings for those products were listed inappropriately in the FDA's Orange Book.
Let me tell people what the Orange Book is, and then we'll ask why they're inappropriate. FDA Orange Book is an authoritative reference that lists all approved drug products, providing information on their therapeutic equivalents, patents, and exclusivities. It helps healthcare providers, regulatory authorities, and generic manufacturers by detailing when generic versions of drugs can be legally marketed. The book ensures a balance between protecting drug innovation and promoting market competition to make medications more accessible and affordable. Is that something you agree with?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
A little known factoid about that is when drug companies list a patent in the Orange Book, that means that any company that wants to sell a copy of those medicines has to wait 30 months or 2.5 years before they can even be considered. The FDA will not consider the drug application for 30 months. And that's kind of what happened here. By inappropriately listing pen injector devices for the GLP-1s, that's not the medication. That's a medical device. That's regulated separately.
So why did they do that? I know the answer, but it's because the molecule's older. It's going to run off patent sooner. So they were trying to squeeze more time out of it, do you think?
They were, although they did it for their newer ones too.
As well.
I think, and they could kind of argue, well, it was a sleight of hand, we sell them in pen format. And so, our bad, sorry. That's basically what Novo Nordisk would say to the FDA about its inappropriate patent listings for these drugs. But in fact, I think they were consciously doing it, trying to get another 2.5 years before any generic or biosimilar could come to market.
Right. Because these GLP medications are forecasted to be huge for some of these companies, right?
Yeah. In fact, I just got something the other day that was kind of interesting. It's a fairly new report from the analytics firm known as Global Data that predicts that sometime in 2024, the GLP-1 inhibitor class of drugs is poised to become the top-selling drug category based upon existing drug sales. The current sales leader is a class of drugs known as PD-1 inhibitors, which is a type of targeted immunotherapy used in treating certain types of cancers. And, my reaction to that is toppling overpriced cancer drugs to become the bestseller is no small undertaking. But we can go back to Novo Nordisk's earlier FDA label extension for its first generation GLP-1 known as liraglutide, which was branded originally as Victoza for type 2 diabetes. 10 years later, they got an FDA label extension for the indication of obesity without type 2 diabetes, and they branded that one Saxenda. They're the exact same drug. It's just the one's prescribed for obesity and one's prescribed for type 2 diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
All of those are patent expired. And so what Novo Nordisk did is they did make legitimate improvements to them. I mean, these were brand new molecules in essence. Then they took the old products off the market and they tried to prevent anyone else from selling copies.
Oh, really? Of the Saxenda?
Yeah.
Oh. So they had something that worked reasonably well. They improved on it, made something that works better, and then how did they block people from making the generic of Saxenda?
Well, the first thing they did was they inappropriately listed patents in the FDA Orange Book, which were not for the drug or biologic itself, but were for medical devices, pen injector devices. There were a whole bunch of them. 36, I think, was what the FTC counted and said, these are all patents for devices. You can't list those in the Orange Book. Only the biologic or the drug can be listed in the Orange Book.
Mm-hmm.
So by doing that, Novo Nordisk could have said, well, it was a mistake, our bad, But by listing them, they automatically got themselves another 30 months of keeping a biosimilar off the market. So the first thing the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, did was they disputed all of these inappropriate patent listings, which were not for the medicines, but were for the devices that the medicines were dosed in. And they said, you can't list these. The statute says you can only list the drug or biologic, not a device. So the FTC went to the Food and Drug Administration and said, we have a long list of patents that we think are inappropriately listed, and we want them, we are calling them into dispute, and we want them removed from the Orange Book. Lo and behold, 36 of Novo Nordisk's patents on various GLP-1 inhibitors, Victoza, Saxenda, and what's the newest one? Semaglutide, whatever they're branding that one.
Ozempic.
Okay. Ozempic, and I think they have another one for Wegovy. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so all of those products, they listed patents for the devices. That's a no-no, right? The statute doesn't allow them to do that.
Yeah, so let me ask two questions there. So first of all, that's not what the Orange Book's for.
No.
Okay. But secondly, play devil's advocate for a second. Be fair to them. Is there something incredibly special about their injections devices that they'd want to protect?
Sure, but you don't do it listing it as a drug that automatically gets a 30-month stay. Medical devices are regulated under a different division of the Food and Drug Administration, and they have their own listings.
So for clarity for people, if they thought there was something so special about their injection device that they wanted to patent it, they would patent that device as a medical device and not tie it to the medication that was inside of it.
Correct.
Okay. But they did, and that buys them this 2.5 years.
Correct.
Gotcha. The FTC notices and goes, no, you're not doing that?
Exactly.
Do they have the power to stop it?
The FTC has the ability to file a complaint with the Food and Drug Administration saying the following list of patents is inappropriate. And they did it for 360 so far. It's not just insulin or GLP-1s. It's
not just this company.
EpiPens, all these things. Right. Yeah. But they did it for over 300 patents that were inappropriately listed. And that's probably just scratching the surface. There's probably a lot of others.
They went after Lilly for Mounjaro and Zepbound pens. Did they do it as well, or did they not do it?
They didn't do it for Lilly on Mounjaro or Zepbound, but what they did do is for a former Lilly product, which specifically was the glucagon rescue kit, and I can't remember the name of it. It's the inhalable one.
Baqsimi? No.
Yeah, Baqsimi,
Is that it?
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Lilly had listed patents for a drug delivery device for Baqsimi on the Orange Book, and that's also a no-no. However, then
Also,
Lilly
Scott,
said,
it's a little tube that you squeeze and it puffs out.
yeah.
Anyway,
and there are technical specifics in there that are patented.
I'm sure.
It's like,
I'm sure.
But anyway, Lilly decided we want to get out of the glucagon business. It's commoditized. We don't make any money. They sold it to a company called Amphastar Pharmaceuticals about a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so now it becomes Amphastar's problem, even though Lilly was the one that inappropriately listed those patents. And I think what's interesting about Amphastar is even though they got slapped on the hands for the Baqsimi inappropriate patent listings, they, on the other hand, got a big gift from the FTC because Amphastar Pharmaceuticals also happens to have a copy of liraglutide now pending FDA approval. So in other words, their copy of Novo Nordisk Saxenda or Victoza can come to the market even sooner. So the Lord giveth with one hand and taketh away with the other is kind of the way they'll look at it. I suspect that for Amphastar, the sales of the biosimilar version of liraglutide probably will make up for any losses they took on Baqsimi.
Yeah. So the reason that the article, you're right, catches my attention so much is that, I mean, besides the fact that at the moment I have to pay cash for my daughter to use a GLP that she needs, and I'm interviewing people who have type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, just for weight loss that are benefiting insanely from this, but they're also talking about having to run around like crackheads looking for this medication, and they're paying out of their pocket some $1,200 a month sometimes. I don't pay that much for Arden out of pocket because she's only using such a tiny little bit of it that we just need one pen to get her through for a while, like that kind of thing. But it's still expensive. I don't want to say that it's not.
Yeah.
And there are studies coming and going on right now that are going to apply GLP medications to people with type 1. And I think that all of this little tic-tac bullshit is going to slow down from people getting this medication if they need it. And it sits with me so poorly that the idea of like, well, we can hold off biosimilars because that's what this really is about, right? Like right now, our big problem is what? There's companies who are poised to do this, but they're being held up by the patenting of the injection systems. Is that right? This episode is sponsored by Medtronic Diabetes. MedtronicDiabetes.com/juicebox. And now we're going to hear from Medtronic champion, Jalen.
I was going straight into high school, so it was a summer heading into high school.
Was that particularly difficult?
Unimaginable. I missed my entire summer. So I was going to a brand new school. I was around a bunch of new people that I had not been going to school with. So it was hard trying to balance that while also explaining to people what type 1 diabetes was. My hometown did not have an endocrinologist. So I was traveling over an hour to the nearest endocrinologist for children. So, outside of that, I didn't have any type of support in my hometown.
Did you try to explain to people, or did you find it easier just to stay private?
I just held back. I didn't really like talking about it. It felt like it was just a repeating record where I was saying things and people weren't understanding it. And I also was still in the process of learning it. So I just kept it to myself, didn't really talk about it.
Did you eventually find people in real life that you could confide in?
I never really got the experience until after getting to college. And then once I graduated college, it's all I see. You can easily search Medtronic Champions. You see people that pop up and you're like, wow, look at all this content. And I think that's something that motivates me. I started embracing more, how I live with type 1 diabetes.
MedtronicDiabetes.com/juicebox to hear more stories from the Medtronic champion community.
Mainly, yes.
Okay.
I didn't look at every single, the FTC letter, you can actually read it and list all the patent numbers. But then you've got to Google patent number, blah, blah, blah. You have to look up each one. There's 36 of them. I looked up 2 just to spot check them. Both of them were for pen injector devices. And my only conclusion was, so this is their game. They're inappropriately listing pen injector devices used with the GLP-1s to prevent or delay biosimilar competition from coming for 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't even know if the biosimilars, I mean, they're now pending FDA approval. It's possible the FDA may come back and on one or two of them and say, you need to fix this before we approve it. And so, they'll get a complete response letter. I'm just surmising here, but that's theoretically possible of things that could happen.
Also, I don't know anything. I just don't want stuff standing in the way of people getting what they need. And I don't want to see this whole insulin thing start over again with a different medication that's going to be important to people with diabetes. Like that's the stuff. Listen, my brother has type 2 diabetes. His A1C went from in the mid 7s to the mid 5s. He did nothing different but shoot Ozempic.
Yeah.
And he doesn't make a lot of money. You know what I mean? Like his life is being changed. It's being lengthened. It's healthier. And 2.5 years, some people might hear that and go, oh, it's just 2.5 years. You go ahead and live with an A1C of 7.5 for 2.5 years and see if you don't think it's a long time. You know what I mean? So anyway.
And try coming up with the money, to pay for these things in the meantime.
Sure. Just pay $29,000 a year so that you don't die.
I mean, what happened with insulin, the pharmaceutical industry reached sort of a compromise. They said, we'll sell a cheaper version of our product. We'll just sell it under the generic drug name. So you have Lilly Humalog and Lilly Insulin Lispro injection. Exact same assembly line. They're the exact same drug. It's just one is branded, one is unbranded.
Mm-hmm.
The cheaper unbranded product seemed to be the way that the pharmaceutical industry could not piss off the PBMs and sell a cheaper version of their product. My guess is that when these biosimilar products for the GLP-1 liraglutide come to market, we probably will see a dual branded, unbranded strategy from them. And by the way, some of the biosimilar companies also white label their products. That's basically private label. They sell it under the Stores brand. So let's say you have a company like Lannett Company, which is one of them that has liraglutide pending FDA approval. If Lannett Company introduces a copy of Saxenda, they will sell one version, they'll brand it something, and they may sell another one under the Rite Aid pharmacy brand name.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's entirely possible. And you wouldn't know it's made by Lannett because it carries the Rite Aid pharmacy brand instead. Right. But I think the dual branded, unbranded strategy seems to be something that the industry found was workable, invoking the ire of the PBMs. Because the PBMs, they're sleazy companies. They'll threaten, they'll say, we're going to keep all your products off formulary if you stop paying us kickbacks. They do stuff like that. And there's really nobody policing it.
I'm super interested to see if I get a cease and desist letter for putting up this episode, actually.
Well, the question is from whom,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can't even decide who it might be from, to be perfectly honest with you. Listen, from my perspective, I'm the father of a kid with type 1. I'm a person who's seeing GLP change their own life and other people's. And I don't have the energy at the end of the last third of my life, Scott. I don't have the energy to watch this happen again. And please look back at the insulin thing, see how it ended up for you, and just don't make the same mistake again. That's kind of how it seems to me. I have a couple of questions for you. I've crafted questions from 3 perspectives. So I have patient perspective, FTC, and pharma perspective.
Okay.
I want to ask them like this. So let me start with the patients. How do you think the FTC challenge to the Orange Book listing will impact the affordability and accessibility of GLP inhibitors for patients?
So number one, it opens the door to cheaper biosimilar products, admittedly older products, but still efficacious. So they still work to come to market 2.5 years sooner. So that's the first thing. I also think, we could see, as I said, a branded and unbranded strategy. The branded is the heavily rebated to PBM market, and then the unbranded product will either be sold as the generic drug name or it'll be sold under the pharmacy name. So I do think we will see cheaper biosimilars coming to market, and probably by the end of the year or early next year.
Okay. Can you think of ways that patients will benefit most from that availability?
Well, number one, cost, right?
Okay.
You know, the biosimilar products are going to be a fraction of what the original or the branded products from Lilly and Novo Nordisk sell for.
Mm-hmm.
So cost is the big one. And then also, I think, you know, we're hearing stories. I don't know how many of the stories are hyperbolic of shortages of these products. And some of it is because internal production capacity to fill and finish these pen devices is constrained. Novo Nordisk already announced that they were going to stop making the patent expired basal insulin Levemir last year so they could redeploy that manufacturing capacity to Ozempic and, you know, whatever it is.
Wegovy.
Yeah, Wegovy.
Yeah.
I can't keep them straight anymore.
No, there's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, assuming they're all approved. And we don't, you know, those are unknowns right now. But we know a whole bunch are currently pending FDA approval.
Okay. So from the FTC perspective, what do you think the regulatory intent was behind this? Because it's something that's happening. They notice it, but you still got to get somebody off their ass to do something about it. Like, why did they act?
Some of it is just to police, you know, there are regulatory authorities that the FTC has. I should point out that since 2022, the Federal Trade Commission has been studying the pharmacy benefit manager business. Their study is currently underway. They expanded it a year later to include PBM-owned group purchasing organizations, or GPOs, you know, and they're investigating their rebate aggregation processes. So I think the FTC study is likely going to uncover a lot of no-nos, you know, a lot of inappropriate and sometimes illegal behavior. And I think what we could see is either the FTC and or the U.S. Department of Justice may, when that study concludes. By the way, a couple weeks ago, the FTC chair, Lena Khan, was at a White House open meeting about PBMs, and she noted that even though the FTC had sent subpoenas to all of the insurance company-owned PBMs, they had not fully complied with those legal subpoenas. So in other words, they're not giving them all the information that they've asked for, and that's a violation of law. So I think FTC is going to have to sue the PBMs and say, we asked you for this, 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 and this, and you only gave us this. You owe us a whole bunch of stuff. When that happens, I don't know, but it's holding up the outcome of their 6B study on the PBM industry. So we'll see.
Wow, I'd like to have you back on to talk about that sometime. So what do you think the FTC can do to ensure that like this doesn't happen? Like, can we put safeguards in place so that somebody just doesn't find a different loophole?
You know, it's hard to say. I think because some of it falls under the purview of the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And the FDA has taken a very hands-off regulatory stance on Orange Book patent listings. But I think by the FTC stepping in and disputing a whole bunch of them, they're saying, we're noticing what pharma is doing here. We think it's inappropriate, and we're taking actions which are within the Food Federal Trade, Administration or Commission, FTC's purview, and we're going to take actions to prevent that where we see it, happening. FTC is understaffed. They probably need about 3,000 more people to study Orange Book patent listings if they were to do them all.
Yeah.
But I think by doing this, they have paved a path forward so that if you're a biosimilar company and you're looking to sell a less costly biosimilar, you may say, well, wait a minute, this is automatically stayed for 30 months, and that's because of the FDA Orange Book. Let me look at all these patents. And so the biosimilar companies can also litigate for inappropriate patent listings.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how good the machinery is to go through them step by step.
Yeah.
But I would think if you're going to bring a biosimilar to market, that might be a path that could expedite your approval process.
Before I ask the next question, I want to state for everyone listening that I am not, nor have I ever been suicidal. So if I end up suicided somewhere, I just want you all to know that ahead of time. Scott, do you feel suicidal at all?
Not currently.
Okay, good. So from the pharma perspective, how have you seen the pharma companies react to the FTC challenge?
I think the drug industry pretends like they didn't do anything wrong. They say, oh, it was inadvertent or it was a mistake, sorry, our bad. But because there's really no punishment mechanism in place, they can keep doing it. But by the FTC opening the dispute process, I think you may see, companies that want to make copies or biosimilars or generics, they may look to that and say, we can litigate these things too.
Yeah.
The drug industry is basically saying, not our bad, sorry, we have too many patents to worry about. It's a mistake, inadvertent, we didn't do it intentionally. I think they did do it intentionally, but with the layers of complexity here, there's really not a lot of safeguards to prevent future similar kinds of abuses. But I think the FTC did open the door to potential disputes that maybe the FDA, because it's voluntarily populated by the pharmaceutical industry, maybe they should take a closer look at these things.
Yeah, listen, I'm a capitalist and I understand looking for ways to make money, and I get all that. And I do wonder if just shining a light on this isn't just going to make darkness somewhere else. And, they're just going to find another way to do the thing. And if that's not just the way things are done, and if you're not going to regulate it enough and you don't have enough people to pay attention to it and follow it up, then is this all just inevitable? Or is it just a shell game, right? Are we just moving things around, pieces around on the board? Or do you think it actually fixes something?
I think it's a good question. And to some extent, it is kind of like whack-a-mole. You hit one and another one pops up someplace else.
Right.
On the other hand, I do think by taking these actions, and this that had never been done before, and some other government agency, the Federal Trade Commission, stepped in and said to the FDA, you got all these patents listed, and they're not for the drugs, the medicines, they're for devices. We don't think these have a place in the Orange Book. And FDA said, you know what, you're right. Our bad. We should have paid closer attention. We didn't. But thank you for bringing it to our attention. They are now removed from the Orange Book. Because it's never been done before, I think it opens the possibility that perhaps in the pharmaceutical industry, you may see something else to sue about in the future.
Well, listen, it's also not lost on me that pharmaceutical companies are large organizations that pay people a significant amount of money. There are a lot of smart people working in pharma companies, and they get a big salary, and we're asking them to do these things. I'm using the GLP medication. I'm incredibly grateful for it. So is there a way for them to protect innovation and allow them to make, as much money as they can, without you know what I mean? Is there a way to do this where they benefit and so do we, and nobody gets screwed?
I don't think pharma is losing here. What they're losing is 2.5 years of extra non-competition that they weren't entitled to in the first place. They already have patent protection on these products. And by the way, the patents on biologics is longer than it is on small molecule drugs.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that many people thought was inappropriate when it happened. Lo and behold, they got an extra 5 years for them. I think the patent system is in place and it will protect pharma's interests, their legitimate interests. Their not so legitimate interests, nobody has to protect that stuff.
Yeah. I would imagine they'd make the argument about the extra 5 years for the biosimilar stuff, the biologic stuff, that they just be like, look, this is new science. It might not bear fruit for a while. It is probably going to help mankind in the long run. You got to make it so that I can put the money into it to find out if this works or not. I would guess. I mean, that's the argument I'd make if I was them.
That's what they said when when the decision was made to pass that, the patent on biologics as opposed to small molecule drugs. That's exactly the argument they made, and they got what they wanted. Again, the patent system is giving them that exclusivity, and they're getting longer for it on the the biologic medicines than they are on the small molecule drugs.
Yeah.
I think the pharmaceutical industry has exactly what it wants and should have. I think what is happening right now is things are being taken away from them that they weren't entitled to in the first place.
Okay. So, we didn't even say this when we started, Scott, but you have type 1 diabetes. How long have you had it?
I will be eligible for a Jocelyn 50-year medal in 2026.
Jesus, how old are you?
I am 55.
Wow. You were diagnosed when you were 5.
7.
7?
Maybe did I do this wrong? I might have done the math wrong.
No.
I have to do it on the calculator now. I can't keep track
That's
anymore.
fine. My daughter was 2. She just turned 2. She's 20 now. It's crazy,
Time zooms by and you don't even realize it's gone already.
Let me ask, I have 2 more questions for you. So the first one is, why do you do this? If it's not your job and you see this happening in the world, I saw what you said on LinkedIn, but I want you to tell people about it. Like, I feel like you were saying, why is no one paying attention to this? Like, why am I not seeing this on the news? Why am I writing about this? I felt like is what you were asking.
Yeah, I do think that's exactly. And I opted to self-publish it because I felt like it was a vital story that needed to be told and nobody was telling it. And, look, I could have, complained to, the media outlets, but I figured it's not worth my effort. I can write this in a short, coherent format, and hopefully people will go to the article and read it, because I think the story is worth telling. We can't really rely on corporate media to do this stuff. The media is, they're sort of struggling with how do we make money, and do we do clicks or do we do, the media outlets' financial advertising driven revenues have changed a lot over the last 10 years. And they have their own issues. They rely primarily on freelance authors, not so many paid staff anymore.
And not someone like you who's been picking through this for years.
Yeah. I mean, this was stuff I wrote literally in like 45 minutes. It was not, truth be told, I did write. For me, the research part is the interesting part.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote like a long ass article. And then what I ended up doing is turning to AI and said, cut this down so that it's more digestible. And so I happened to use Google Bard, or Gemini, I guess is what they rebranded it. I entrusted the AI to edit it for me. I did that. I then reread it, made a few tweaks and edits to things I thought needed to be in there. And so that's kind of what I ended up with. But it started out with my work. It wasn't like generated by the computer. I did the research. I just used it for an editorial function.
I don't think that it's reasonable for us to expect everyday people to believe, care, or look into the idea that a patent that doesn't belong on a plastic injector might stand in the way of them getting something for extra 2.5 years. That's, I don't know how we're supposed to all keep up with that stuff. You know what I mean?
It's crazy. And, this is because it is such a complicated and highly regulated industry in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
The drug industry is not for wimps, but on the other hand, it doesn't mean you can be, a vulture capitalist and break the law.
Yeah.
You might consider it a sleight of hand, but in fact, it impacts real world people. In this instance, the FTC stepping in really helped open the door for it. But there could be other conditions that have similar issues. You just have to roll up your sleeves and do the research and figure out why it's happening and then find the root cause. I think one of the issues on insulin that we discovered was for a long time, what we were told was the reason prices are high was because the pharmaceutical industry prices them high. That wasn't really true. What was happening was the PBMs were, doing stuff behind the scenes. They were acting in an anti-competitive fashion and nobody was noticing it. And they were doing it because they didn't have to tell anybody about it.
Yeah.
Now, I think, I spent many years kind of uncovering how things happened. And it was a fascinating journey along the way. But the bottom line is, this is stuff that I consider myself pretty knowledgeable about these days. And hopefully, someday when there's some other drug that I need when I'm dying of cancer or something, I may be able to do something there.
Yeah, that's my thought as you're talking about, like when you said somebody probably just thought they had some business sleight of hand, great idea, got themselves a little extra bonus, their boss liked them a little bit. And meanwhile, there are people out there not getting insulin.
Yeah.
And, and to say, oh, don't worry, it's going to come off patent in this much time. Well, there's a lot of people who get hurt between now and whenever that happens. And then it could be too late for those people at that point too. There's some things, listen, I'm with you. People can't be vultures about it, but I'm all right with people making money and innovating and running businesses. All that makes sense to me. But at some point, you do have to step back and look at the human impact of what's happening here and say this has to be part of the equation to some degree. You can't just let a lawyer make this decision. Somebody's got to actually, how many times I've spoken to somebody who works at a pharma company or device manufacturer, something like that. They don't have diabetes. When you start talking to them about it, they don't even understand what it means. They don't know what it's like to live with it. They don't even know what they're doing to you or helping you with even sometimes. Even the good things they're doing, they don't have an appreciation for why it's valuable for you.
Yeah.
And, so you can't put that decision on a bean counter when it's got real world implications at the end.
Yeah. I mean, I do think there, on the insulin case in particular, I think JDRF stepped in and kind of helped bankroll a nonprofit drug company to bring biosimilars of the 3 best-selling insulins to market.
Mm-hmm.
Those are now pending FDA approval. By the way, they have insulin pens.
When you say JDRF, do you mean Breakthrough T1D?
Breakthrough T1D as of yesterday, yes.
Okay.
It'll take me a while to get used to that, but yeah. But, there again, nonprofit sector really played a role in enabling that to happen. On the obesity issue, I don't know who their advocacy organization is, but presumably there is one. And if not, maybe somebody wants to start one.
Yeah, they should. Let me ask you two. I guess I said 2 more, but I meant 3 more. Let me say this to you. It's not a question. If you sit down and put together a thoughtful list of PBM style interviews, I'll do as many of them with you as you want. If you'd like to lay out to really explain to people what they are and how they work and where it hurts them, I would be fascinated by that. It's no pressure, but that would be amazing. And then my last question is, do you have any idea about this new Mark Cuban-led online pharmacy and what impacts that might have for people with diabetes?
On the PBM thing, I'll shelve that for now. I think if you could even get them to talk to you, which is highly unlikely, there would be a boatload of questions, but I'm not confident that would ever happen.
I have a series called Cold Wind where we take out people's names and change their voices. So if anybody has recently retired incredibly wealthy from a PBM and wants to unburden their soul, please give me a call.
Well, here's something you could turn to, and that is that the Civica nonprofit drug company, Civica Script is its consumer-facing unit.
Mm-hmm.
And the CEO of the Civica Script operating unit happens to be a former Optum RX executive. And she did a whole interesting podcast on, how her PBM experience really helped her in the role. And so I would defer on that one. What was you mentioned something else, Mark Cuban, I think, was the issue.
Do you see impact for people with type 1 from Cuban's new pharmacy?
Yes, I do. I think whether anyone cares to admit it or not, Mark Cuban's cost plus pharmacy has had a very big impact and will continue to have a growing impact. And there's a lot of reasons for it, but introducing transparency is kind of a key that he's doing. And Alex Ashmiansky, who's the founder and president of Cost Plus Drugs, who works for Mark Cuban, he has type 1 himself. So he knows this stuff inside and out.
Yeah.
But I do think we will see Cost Plus Drug Company, for example, may be selling a GLP-1 inhibitor, one of the many that are now pending FDA approval. I would not be surprised to see one or more of those coming from them. They're going to give you an honest, 15% markup. The prices are probably going to be better than you're going to get from your PBM, from your insurance company. So look to them. I think it's definitely on their radar and it's coming.
Great.
And by the way, one other thing that I think Cost Plus Drugs is doing that's kind of interesting that is a little under the radar is the Team Cuban Card initiative that they've launched, which is basically they have a network of local pharmacies around the country that will sell their drugs at Cost Plus Drug prices, but you can just go into a local pharmacy and do it. And that's kind of a cool thing because for things that need to be temperature controlled, like insulin and GLP-1s, you might not want to do it mail order, but you might be willing to walk into a local pharmacy and buy it.
Okay. That's interesting. This is usually the point where I say, is there anything I didn't think to ask you that I should have?
No, just what I would ask is just share the link to my article when you post this.
Well,
I think others might like to get to read it. And I think it's an interesting article, to say the least.
No, I agree. And Scott, I'd be happy to share the link to it. I'd be happy to repost it if you wanted me to. You just let me know what you'd like.
Yeah. I mean, when you post the show, just include the article link with it. I think that's relevant. I'd
also like to put your blog up there because I think people should see some of the other things you've been thinking about and talking about as well.
Sure. You can. Welcome to do it.
Let me ask you this last little bit at the end. How did the South Park GLP episode strike you?
Well, truth be told, I'm not a Paramount Plus subscriber, so I watched a summary of it and I watched the trailer for the episode. That struck me as sort of very indicative of off-label marketing, and I'll leave it at that. That's stuff that pharma is not supposed to do, but somebody thought it was an interesting idea and they did it. Interestingly, they talked about semaglutide. They mentioned the generic drug name like over and over and over in that episode. So it was kind of interesting.
Do you think there's something sinister with the South Park episode? You believe that it's a marketing tool?
I believe they're depicting the drugs as not legitimate medicines, but as vanity drugs.
They never really spoke. I watched it. It didn't really speak about diabetes at all.
Yeah.
And it was the first third of it was oddly accurate and and funny, but it was obviously overblown and cartoonized, which is what I would expect, right? At the end, when, machine gun wielding moms are double fist injecting, GLP and then attacking trucks with GLP medication inside of it, trying to find their stash. I mean, it got into very ridiculous at the end. It was interesting. It never occurred to me that I never looked to see who funded it. So.
Well, I don't necessarily think, I don't think you can point a straight line to Novo Nordisk and say that. And truth be told, there was a clip in there where they said both like Ozempic and Mounjaro, which are two competing products from two different companies. They didn't hold that closely to it, but it did strike me as sort of kind of weird off-label marketing for these products.
I will tell you this,
whether intentional or not.
Satirically, it was pretty on point.
The thing I found most funny about it was when they go into the dark room behind where the actual insurance person worked. And it's like this dark closet with an old typewriter and a fax machine.
Guy's going very slowly. And then he picks up the phone and he says, he doesn't say anything. You don't hear anything on the phone. He hangs it up and he goes, medical director said no. I was like, yeah.
Yeah.
And then at some point he actually said the line, something about we always say no so that then you have to go out there and battle the healthcare system. It was interesting because it was very satirically correct on that part of living with an illness where you're constantly fighting and arguing with people and running in circles. Feels like you're on a hamster wheel to come back to hear no again, to just try to find another perspective till one day someone just goes, okay.
The thing I found funniest about it was because there was probably more truth to it than fiction.
Mm.
No,
I thought the same. So, all right. So, I might have to.
Anyway,
I would say I'd lend you my Paramount Plus login, but I don't want to get in trouble. Scott, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Can you hold on for 1 second for me?
Sure.
Thanks. A huge thank you to one of today's sponsors, Gvoke Glucagon. Find out more about Gvoke HypoPen at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. You spell that GVOKEGLUCAGON.com/juicebox. A huge thanks to US Med for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Don't forget, usmed.com/juicebox. This is where we get our diabetes supplies from. You can as well. Use the link or call 888-721-1514. Use the link or call the number, get your free benefits check so that you can start getting your diabetes supplies the way we do from US Med. Jalen is an incredible example of what so many experience living with diabetes. You show up for yourself and others every day, never letting diabetes define you. And that is what the Medtronic Champion community is all about. Each of us is strong, and together we're even stronger. To hear more stories from the Medtronic Champion community or to share your own story, visit medtronicdiabetes.com/juicebox and look out online for the hashtag Medtronic Champion. To read Scott's blog, go to blog.sstrummello.com. blog.sstrummello.com. I know that Facebook has a bad reputation, but please give the private Facebook group for the Juicebox Podcast a healthy once-over. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. The group now has 47,000 members in it. It gets 150 new members a day. It is completely free, and at the very least, you can watch other people talk about diabetes. And everybody is welcome. Type 1, Type 2, gestational, loved ones, everyone is welcome. Go up into the featured tab of the private Facebook group, and there you'll see lists upon lists of all of the management series that are available to you for free in the Juicebox Podcast. Becoming a member of that group, I really think it will help you. It will at least give you community. You'll be able to kind of lurk around, see what people are talking about, pick up some tips and tricks. Maybe you can ask a question or offer some help. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes on Facebook. Once there was a time when I just told people, if you want a low and stable A1C, just listen to the Juicebox Podcast. But as the years went on and the podcast episodes grew, it became more and more difficult for people to listen to every one. So I made the Diabetes Pro Tip series. This series is with me and Jenny Smith. Jenny is a certified diabetes care and education specialist. She's also a registered and licensed dietitian and a type 1 herself for over 30 years. And I, of course, am the father of a child who was diagnosed at age 2 in 2006. The Pro Tip series begins at episode 210 with an episode called Newly Diagnosed or Starting Over. And from there, all about MDI, pre-bolusing, insulin pumping, bumping and nudging, variables, exercise, illness, injuries, surgeries, glucagon, long-term health, bumping and nudging, how to explain type 1 to your family, postpartum, honeymoon, transitioning, all about insulin, temp basals. These are all different episodes. Setting your basal insulin, fat and protein, pregnancy, the glycemic index and load, and so much more, like female hormones and weight loss. Head now to juiceboxpodcast.com. Go up in the menu at the top and click on Diabetes Pro Tip. Or if you're in the private Facebook group, there's a list of these episodes right in the featured tab. Find out how I help keep my daughter's A1C between 5.2 and 6.2 for the last 10 years without diet restrictions. Juiceboxpodcast.com. Start listening today. It's absolutely free. If you're not already subscribed or following in your favorite audio app, please take the time now to do that. It really helps the show. And get those automatic downloads set up so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. The episode you just heard was professionally edited by Wrong Way Recording. WrongWayRecording.com.